continuing on with session 8 on the series called Decoding Communication. This is decoding communication between husbands and wives. This session is actually part 2 of the session called Speaking the Language of Love. And this is for you guys learning how to be able to speak a language that your wife will understand. And we've been going through the Bible and we've been sharing a lot of useful and helpful information for both wives and for husbands on how they can have a better relationship to learn how to decode the problems that come up in their relationships, and sometimes they just simply can't understand why things happen the way they do. Okay, in the last session, I was sharing about how your wife was designed by God to want and need closeness or oneness based on that Ephesians chapter 5 motif about the two shall become one flesh, about how the two of you shall become one, that there should be this type of oneness or closeness there, and that this closeness is vitally important to a wife being able to deal with her emotional insecurities. And I gave you guys several suggestions how you could meet that need. Well, now we're going to move on to some other areas that can help men broken closeness or oneness. Now, I know that some of you guys, maybe you're frustrated in your relationship with your wife and you don't understand why things happen the way they do. And I'm hoping that this session and the previous session are going to help you to understand more things about your wife. And for you women that are watching, I just hope too that you'll just bear with me as I share these things with your husband. And hopefully, I know some of you gals will be out there nodding your head saying, yeah, that's right. And that's what I'll hope will happen. Also, a little disclaimer, I'm hoping that I'm talking to goodwill people, maybe that have had some bumps along the way, there's some hurt there, some barriers built up. Maybe you guys are wondering, why in the world does my wife do this? Or you ladies have been frustrated with your husbands. But basically down inside, I hope you're goodwill people who really want to try to make your marriage work. I'm not talking here to people who are abusive, who are controllers, and people who are selfish and bent on evil intent. And if you are in a relationship where those kind of things are happening, I would suggest very strongly that you get professional help and try to find out a way to bring resolution to that kind of situation. Now, I just want to talk as a guy to a guy, okay? You guys, you need to learn to be the spiritual guardians in your families. You need to learn to step up to the plate and simply do what God's asked you to do. And you know what that is? That's to love your wife. And that's why this presentation and the previous presentation was called Learning to Speak the Language of Love, because that is the language that your wife can relate to. Now, when I was about 25, 26, 27 years old, I thought I knew how to make closeness. So one year I decided to buy my wife a special birthday gift, okay? We lived out in the country. We are 10 acres of property in North Idaho here. And I went out and I selected that special gift for my wife. I got her a really nice fence post digger, one of those kind of fence post diggers. It was, I just thought it was a great gift. I mean, it was a great improvement over the gift I got her the year before, which was basically a hydraulic jack. And by the way, my kids liked to play with that hydraulic jack when they were small in the living room. The point is, us guys, we have a lot to learn. We think that we understand that if we do certain things for our wives that they're going to appreciate it, but they just don't think the same way we do. We have a lot to learn. Well, what do we have to learn? Well, simply this. One thing we really have to learn, and this is really for both men and women, we have to learn acceptance. Now, there's going to be some things in your spouse's personality or their character that you need to learn to just accept. When I look at my wife, I say, oh, I wish my wife wasn't like this or like that. But sometimes I have to realize this is who she is. And I need to learn to love and accept her. And we can't manipulate. We can't try to change people. All we can do is recognize that Christ is the one who can really bring about change. We can't change people, but what we can do is we can learn to understand. We can learn to facilitate in our communication why things happen the way they do and facilitate oneness and closeness by better understanding. And that's what I'm really hoping will happen. Now, have you ever heard of the definition of insanity? Insanity is oftentimes referred to as doing the same thing over and over and getting the same results. Now, let's say that I came to your church and I was going to speak at your church, and I pulled up in the parking lot and I parked my car. And when I parked my car, I went to shut the door and the door popped back open. Apparently it wasn't latching. Now, if I just pushed my door shut and I walked to your church and you were looking out the window of your church, you would say, oh, he's got a problem with his car. But if I started shutting the door and it bounced back, and I kept shutting the door and bounced back, and I kept shutting the door and it bounced back, and I kept shutting the door and it bounced back, And then you came to the window a half hour later and I was still shutting the door and it bounced back and shutting, and you came back 45 minutes later and I was still shutting the door and bounced back. You wouldn't think there was a problem with the car. You would think there was a problem with me. You know, that's the definition of insanity, doing the same things over and over again and getting the same results. And you know, that's exactly what happens in a lot of marriage relationships. You know, we do the same things over and over and over and we get the same results. And there's this insanity, this craziness there that creates this cycle. And what I'm hoping to have happen is that Christ can come into your lives, that you can start to understand, you can decode what is causing the door not to shut, and to be able to fix it, to stop the cycle dead in its tracks. Now, I have some good news for some of you guys about this particular session. When I learned some of these ideas, man, did it help me when I learned to decode really what was happening, when my wife would react a certain way, when I would do something that would trigger something in her emotions, that I really started to understand what was going on with my wife. And I'll tell you, it was a real blessing to me. And the good news is there is things that we can do as guys to be able to remedy the problems we have. Now, we need to, at this point, bring up how the female mind works. This is kind of a review from previous sessions, and surveys have showed, out of thousands of women have been surveyed, shows that most women think this way. Now, I mentioned that a guy thinks very linear, right? They think one track. Well, I want to share with you again about how your wife thinks, the whole process of how your wife's mind works. This is your wife's mind. She could be having all these pop-up windows coming to her mind, thinking about grandma and grandpa, her mother and father, thinking about the kids, thinking about her marriage relationship, wondering about the daughter that just graduated, somebody getting married, the husband. You know, it's like your wife has a bunch of pop-up windows that she can't control. Now, I shared with you in the last session and the session before that, research has shown that about 80% of women have no control over these pop-up windows. Think about that. 80% of the women have no control of these pop-up windows coming to their minds. And I also showed that nearly 97% of women say that emotions from the past experiences, or from their past experiences, what I refer to as historical pop-up windows, can be triggered by seemingly nothing. So add that together, you know, that your wife has all these pop-up windows constantly coming to her mind about things currently happening, and she also has historical pop-up windows of things that have happened in the past that can be seemingly triggered by nothing. Okay, and now add to this, now catch this, 7 out of 10 women think or worry about their relationship with their spouse. Wow. 7 out of 10 women think or worry about their relationship with their spouse. Add this whole combination together and you've got your wife. And now, a survey was done with several thousand women, and the question was asked, how often do you think about your relationship, whether it's going well or how your husband feels about you? Choose one. Look at this. 50% of the women said most of the time, that's 1 out of 2 women said most of the time they were concerned about their relationship with their husband. Another 19% of the women said often or occasionally. Wow, that is saying that right there, over 70% of the women, or 7 out of 10% of the women, were concerned about their relationship with their spouse. They were worried about what was happening. And so that causes a wife to read into you guys, you know, your facial expressions, your attitudes, and they're constantly insecure because, see, they want to have closeness with you. And if they don't have that closeness with you, as I'm going to point out in this session, there's going to be some problems. And all these pop-up windows can be triggered by seemingly nothing. So now you can understand better why sometimes your wife can get emotional and she can get upset over seemingly nothing. And sometimes, you know, the issue is not even the issue. Now, something that just happened to me, for instance, this past week. I was in the kitchen talking with my wife, and she started to get upset, and I said, honey, what's the problem? And, you know, she started to tell me about some things that were going on, and I started to take it personally. And as we were going on, I realized that I'd triggered or I'd tripped something that she was dealing with in her feelings, and that I realized as I started understanding this, since I am doing this presentation, I'm trying to understand better about what happens in a relationship, that what happened in the kitchen was probably not even associated with anything that I had said or done that morning. You know, and so what happened was that as we started talking and I was learning to listen, and we're going to talk about this, guys, learning to listen to our wives, after she went through several different things and she shared with me, you know, a couple of these pop-up windows, issues that she was dealing with, the bottom line was, the truth was, that as I just listened and I kept talking with her and asking more questions, that out of the blue, she brings up another issue about our daughter at the academy. And she said, well, what probably really is bothering me more than anything is, and then she shared that with me. And when she shared that with me, and I didn't react, I didn't get upset, I just listened, I realized this was the underlying pop-up window that had triggered all the other pop-up windows, that when she was able to discuss that with me, which she was concerned about how I would react to it, then everything was fine. She just needed to get it out, but she had to work through a process to get to that point, to get that out. And see, us guys, sometimes we personalize it. We get defensive, we even get angry, just because we feel like, you know, this kind of reaction is just unjustifiable. I didn't do anything to deserve this. Why are you being so emotional? And then, you know, we try to be, you know, the great spiritual counselors, and we say, you know what you need to do? You just need to learn to trust in God more. If you trust in God more, you wouldn't have these kind of problems. You wouldn't have all these issues you deal with. And you know, that's true. Our wives and ourselves need to learn to trust in God. But at the same time, if your wife is dealing with emotional things and she needs to get these things out, sometimes she just needs to have a husband who cares and is willing to listen. And then, you know, being a husband, try to give her some good advice. You know, worrying doesn't do any good. Just stop worrying, you know. And you stop and sit back and you wonder why our wives even get more upset at us. And then we end up having some kind of big blowout over something that started out just seemingly very small. It's because down underneath the surface of your wife, she's dealing with a whole lot of different emotions. Now, I want to ask you some questions about your wives, okay? Now, this is for you guys. I want you to stop and think about this for a second. Have you ever wondered why your wife reacts certain ways in certain situations? Have you ever wondered why your wife will ask you, do you love me? Even though you can't think of any reason why she would think you've changed your mind. It's like the one guy said, I told you I loved you when I married you. If anything changes, I'll let you know. You know, the truth is that your wife is wanting closeness, and she's got this personal insecurity. 1 out of 2 women have personal insecurity about how they're interfacing with their relationship with you. And so now you're starting to understand a little bit more about your wife, why she asks something like that. Have you ever wondered why your wife takes your needing time to have some space as, well, you're upset at her and you're trying to get away from her? You know, sometimes this guy just needs some space, and your wife will read into your motives like, wow, you must be upset about something, when really you just want some space. You had a hard day at work. You know, we're going to talk a little bit more about that as this session goes on. But have you ever wondered why your wife maybe wants to talk and talk and talk about your relationship at times when you really don't feel like it? Or have you ever wondered why your wife is seemingly critical or pushy for no reason that you can figure out? Or have you ever wondered why your wife gets crabby or excessively emotional and pushes you away, and yet is unhappy or even angry when you stay away? Well, it's because she needs closeness, because she's dealing with all these pop-up windows and these historical pop-up windows of things in the past that maybe she hasn't really had closure to. She's dealing with her insecurity of her relationship with you. And that's why this last session started out with the need of your wife to have closeness. As Christ has closeness with the church, to have the husband have closeness with his bride. That need for oneness, the two shall become one flesh. Now, I had mentioned earlier about triggers. Now, this is a critical thing about the whole concept of triggers, and that these triggers can set off these pop-up windows that for, you know, just seemingly just out of the blue all of a sudden. I want to share with you guys so that you can understand about some of the trigger devices that actually can affect your wife. One, it's very simple and very obvious. It's called conflict. Conflict can be a trigger. Now, I appreciate what one woman wrote. She stated it this way, and I want you to look very carefully what she's saying, you guys. This is what she says, quote, "A lot of desperate feelings surface for me when I feel like my husband is displeased with me." Now, did you notice that? That she has feelings surface when she feels her husband is displeased with me. Pop-up windows surfacing, all related to the way she feels her husband is thinking about her. She goes on to say, I know it sounds old-fashioned, that I'm a pretty independent person, but it still really affects me. So one of the trigger devices can be just a simple conflict. Can bring up not only a conflict about the issue that you're discussing at that time, but a whole bunch of other things that are buried underneath the surface. Now, this is not pop psychology, okay? This is the way God's made us, and sin has contaminated and hurt those things in our relationship. And you know, the amazing thing is this is not about pop psychology. This is about pop-up windows that really exist, that 95% of the women say that they have to deal with these things. Here's another trigger device, you guys. Withdraw. You know, and this is how a lot of us deal with conflict with our wives. We withdraw, we step back, and our wife picks up on our body languages, and she starts to read into that maybe more that's there, and that causes a sense of lack of closeness with her. Here's another trigger device that can cause all kinds of emotions to come to the surface, is silence. Maybe you've had a hard day at work and you just want some time, just some space, and you withdraw, and your wife picks up on that, and she thinks that you're withdrawing because, you know, you're mad at her. And that can trigger things, and it can end up spiraling into a debate and a conversation that ends up escalating into the crazy cycle, into a conflict. Here is another trigger device. It may be simply that her, you know, you could call it her emotional bank account is depleted. In other words, maybe she's been just overloaded with the kids that day. She's had things that are bugging her. If she's working at work and a relationship with a friend, maybe she's just going so many different directions, dealing with her kids and with the church, and things are taxing on her, that her emotional bank account is totally depleted. And she just needs closeness with you, and so it becomes a trigger device that just sets her off, and she wants to vent and talk with you. Here's another trigger device. You're gone a lot. Maybe you have a job where you spend a lot of time away from home and you're gone a lot, and that's a trigger device. Another trigger device is unresolved conflict. You've had an argument about something and you haven't come back around and discussed it and resolved it. All these things could trigger her emotions and many pop-up windows in her minds. Well, now that you're aware of what could be happening with your wife, there's some practical things you can do to speak the language of love. Okay, now, I know you guys are going to have a hard time with this, because us guys can be stubborn. We can be like little teeny boys that pout, and we get crabby and grouchy, and we don't, you know, we withdraw, and I don't want to talk to her about it anymore. It wasn't fair the way she treated me. You know, we act like little teeny kids sometimes, you know. Let's just admit it. But here's what the scripture says. It says in Philippians chapter 3, verse 13, it says, I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. So you guys can take this advice and know that Christ is there to strengthen you. And I love what it says in the book of Judges, where about a guy who was married to newly married to a woman, and he was having some very serious problems with her. This is what it says in Judges 19, verse 3. It says, and the husband arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her and to bring her again. Oh, it's so beautiful. The husband arose and he did what? He pursued her. And he did what? He spoke friendly to her, kindly to her, affectionately to her. Why? To bring her back again. And that's what we need to do. Okay, here's some useful advice for you guys. During a conflict, this is very, very simple. Just set aside your male ego for a little bit and just listen to what I'm going to share with you. During a conflict, reassure her of your love. Say to your wife something like this. You know, I'm upset right now and I need some space, but I want you to know that I love you and that we're okay. Now, I want to share with you a survey with over 3,000 women who were involved with this survey about what these women said when asked this simple question. In an emotional conflict, if your husband reassures you of his love, how much does it help diminish any turmoil you are feeling? Choose one answer. Now look at this. 54% of the women said quite a lot. Another 34% of the women said some. So check this out. It says that 95% of the women said that this one step on the part of their husband would diminish or even eliminate the emotional turmoil on their part. I like what it says in the book Early Writings, page 119. It says, if pride and selfishness were laid aside, 5 minutes would remove most difficulties. Now this is another question that was asked, very similar to the last question, but it is kind of a continuation of that same question. It says, in the middle of an emotional conflict with your husband, he says, I don't want to talk about this right now. And then he adds some reassurance like, but I want you to know I love you and that we're okay. Here's the question. Would you be more likely to give him some space? How about it, guys? Would you like a little bit of space during a conflict? It says choose one. Look at this. 43% of the women said much more likely. Another 43% of the women said more likely. So right here you have 86% of the women saying that if you just basically followed through with that one thing, saying that everything was okay and that you just needed some space, 86% of our wives would say that they would be more willing to give you some space. Wow, would you like to have some space to process some things in a controversy or a conflict that's going on in your home at that time? Sure you would. All of us guys would like that. Here's another little tip. When you need space, reassure her that it's not about her. Now, I'm not talking about the need for space during conflict. Let's say you've had a hard day at work, you just came home, you're just kind of, you're maybe got issues with something happening, a problem at work, or a problem with a car, or a problem with an employee, or a problem with your boss, or, it could be a multitude of different things. And you're just kind of like, needing some space and kind of backing up. And your wife comes to you and she's checking out your body language. Reassure her that your need of space at that time has absolutely nothing to do with her. In fact, my wife this weekend, we were sitting, and it was Sabbath afternoon. I was sitting out in the sunshine just relaxing, and she came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." And she goes, "Well, what are you thinking?" I said, "Nothing," And she says, how do you do that? I was just zoning out, and she could have picked up on that and thought I was upset at her because I wasn't talking. The truth was, my compartment was empty, I wasn't thinking about anything. Now, here comes a really tough one. Now, you guys got to be macho and tough enough to be able to do this one, okay? If she's upset, I know this is going to be hard for you guys, but if she's upset, realize that she needs a hug. Now, this reminds me of a visit I had with a close friend not too long ago. He was telling me about how his wife was being disrespectful to him a lot, and he was really upset. And I shared with him, I said, you know what you need to do? You need to go to your wife and simply just give her a hug and let her know you love her when she does these kind of things. And he looked at me and he bristled. He said, "Look, I'm not going to hug a porcupine." And he said, "I'm not going to give her a hug or do anything or show her any more love until she starts giving me some more respect." Now I want to let you guys know that will really work. Yeah, sure. That is a really poor way to go about trying to bring closeness with your wife. Be man enough to realize that you need to give her a hug. Just watch a wife who is emotionally upset melt by a husband who isn't combative or defensive and goes up and wraps his arms around his wife and just simply gives her a hug and brings about closeness. This brings up one other thing, is learning to pray with your wife. You can pray with your wife. Now, I've been told by a lot of guys, and I agree with them, that this makes many men uncomfortable. I can pray at staff meetings. I can pray at the family time for worship. I can pray personally by myself during my devotional time, but I really struggle sometimes with just getting on my knees with my wife and praying on a one-to-one. But you'll find out that by doing this brings that closeness, that oneness with your wife. Men, pray with your wives. Also, did you know that our prayer lives can be affected by our relationship with our wife? There was a guy that one day that went to his pastor, and he was sharing with the pastor about, he said, my prayer life is just really bad right now. I feel like my prayers are only going to the ceiling. And the pastor looked at the fellow and said, "Well, how are things going with your wife?" And the guy looked a little bit perplexed, and he said, "I didn't come here to talk to you about my wife. I came here to talk to you about my prayer life." And the pastor said, "Oh, no, these two go hand in hand." Why? Because what it says in 1 Peter 3:7, it says, "Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with your wives with understanding, giving honor unto the wife as to the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life." Isn't that beautiful? That your prayers be not hindered. See, your prayers can be hindered by your relationship with your wife. So there's a correlation that definitely takes place between your relationship with your wife and your own personal prayer life. And it is that correlation, just as it is with Christ and the church, as it is with the husband and the wife. And if that relationship's not good, it's going to affect your personal prayer life. Here is another little tidbit of information that can really help you guys. If she needs to talk about a relationship, listen to me. Do your best to listen without becoming defensive. Oh boy, now this is a tough one for us guys. If you're like most men, what happens when there's a controversy, we want some, and we get upset, we want some space. Most women, when they're upset, they don't want space. You know what they want to do? They want to talk. You just watch little girls. Two little girls can be out on a playground, they can get into an argument, and they can start yelling at each other, and one will say, "I hate you," and the other one will stomp off, and they won't talk to each other. And then the next day they'll come and they'll start talking, and they'll have face-to-face time, and they'll talk about this, they'll talk about that, talk about this, talk about that. And finally one girl says, "I'm sorry about what happened happened yesterday. Oh, so am I. And next thing you know, they're best friends again. Because they know that in the psyche of a girl, they know that they have to kind of like go full circle around and vent their feelings, verbalize their feelings, and then when they get it all out, they can make everything all right. Because most women process their thoughts and feelings by talking about them. They need to be able to get their feelings out on the table, and that means that we have to be willing to listen. You know, when she doesn't feel close to you, she's going to react, as I said in the crazy cycle. And what men will feel is that that reaction is kind of a negative thing. And then a guy's going to feel that she's being disrespectful. And then what will happen is she'll move closer to the guy. She'll come face to face with the guy because, as I shared with you, women will come face to face during conflict. And this will make you feel very threatened. But just try to understand something, that this is her way of trying to bring about reconciliation. Try to do your best not to get upset. The other day when my wife started venting about all these different problems and things, I started to take it personally. My blood pressure started going up, my adrenaline was going, and I just said, Lord, please give me the strength and the grace not to get upset. Listen to her, because there's probably something much deeper going on down inside that I'm not catching. And you know, as I did, finally the issue came out, and we were able to discuss and talk about that. And after we got to that point, everything was better. You know, and I shared with you previously that in a conflict, you know, 85% of the women said that they moved towards the other person to talk during conflict. And I shared with you just on the other exact opposite of that, that during a conflict, that 85% of the men will shut down or walk away from a conflict. God's, you know, made her to be, you know, a mother. But as I shared, sin oftentimes has caused these things that are tendencies that God has built into us. I like to use the word hardwired because that sounds like computer technology or something, but God's hardwired us this way that because of sin, because of selfishness, these strengths all of a sudden take on backsided weaknesses. And so a mothering can be turned into a thing where she's coming to you face to face and she's mothering you, trying to fix the problem. And we need to recognize that this is the way that she's trying to bring about closure and understanding and reconciliation. So don't feel threatened by the fact that she's getting closer and closer to your face. Understand that she needs to vent to help her to close these emotional issues, these pop-up windows in her mind. As I shared with you, women need to talk in a way that shows respect. We had 3 sessions on that, but at the same time, you guys listen to me. We need to learn to talk and listen in a way that shows love. Now, I'm going to go into a different direction. You're going to see how this all ties together, but men are fixers. Men are problem solvers. And you start looking at this picture of what I've painted so far about how women come, they start sharing all these different problems they're having. They're venting these different pop-up windows and trying to, you know, to get these things out on the table, talk about their problems. Well, you make that more complicated by the fact that men are fixers. It turns the whole dynamics even more complicated. For instance, if another guy comes to me and he's got a problem with his car, I'm assuming that he's actually coming to me for help to how to fix that car. You know, if a guy says, you know, I've got a problem, my car is doing this and that, I figure, you know, as a guy, he's tried everything possible to fix this, and now he's coming and talking to me, direct communication, in a compartmentalized way, that he needs some help to be able to fix this car. And so he's wanting a suggestion from me. Well, that's not necessarily the case about how a woman thinks, and I'm going to share that just a little bit more about that in just a second. But the other thing about proving that men, you know, are fixers, you just watch what happens when a lady locks her keys in a car and you have 3, 4 guys standing around. They all will kick into this I can fix this mode. They're all trying to open that car door because there's something about guys when there's problems there that they feel like they got to fix it. And you add this dynamics together with your wife. You know, maybe you're tired, you come home from work, you've been fixing things at work all day, dealing with different issues. You come home and you just want to relax. You want to just kind of go into neutral for a while. And your wife starts venting about different things that she's dealing with, and she's starting to share with you this and that and this and this and this and that. And you start thinking, and I've been there, I know exactly what I'm talking about. You start thinking this way, oh no, now I have more things I need to fix. Well, I've got good news for you. You don't have to try to fix those things. Listen to me. This is what will happen. This is probably what's happened in your situation. She's starting to share with you all these things, and she's about what happened to her during her day, and she's talking about this problem and that problem. She's venting, and so you start interrupting her. And you start giving her suggestions on how she can fix this by taking this advice, or she can fix this problem or problems if she just listened to you for a few seconds. And then finally she'll interrupt you, she'll be frustrated, and she'll say, "You're not listening to me." Have you ever heard your wife say that? Well, the truth is, you can repeat back to her everything that she's just said, but really what she's saying is that you're not listening to my feelings. She wants you to listen and understand her feelings. She doesn't want you to give her advice. Did you catch that? She doesn't want you to give her advice. And this is good news. Just think about this for a second. Most wives don't want you to fix the problem. Now you're baffled, I'm sure. Most wives don't want you to fix the problem, at least at this point. When I first learned this, it was really shocking, and I'll tell you what, it was kind of a relief too. Here was a question that was asked several thousand women. If a husband offers a very reasonable solution to an emotional issue under discussion, do you feel it would help you to solve your problem? Now that sounds like a very rational, very logical question, doesn't it, you guys? Look at what the statistics say. 95% of the women said a reasonable solution would not solve their problem. So guys, don't even try to fix it. It's not even worth trying to fix. Just listen. And that's the amazing thing about this next point. The person who listens well holds enormous power. Did you catch what I just said? The person who listens well holds enormous power. So guys, learn to ask this one simple question. Honey, do you want me to help you fix it, or do you just want me to listen? Guys, memorize that. Honey, do you want me to help you fix it, or do you just want me to listen? See, letting your wife vent her feelings often in and of itself will bring an answer to the problem. In many cases, the wife releases her emotional frustrations, and you know what? She's more likely to be open to your suggestions. Why? Because you listen to her feelings. Listen to what the survey says. This question was asked several thousand women. Once you have been able to work through your feelings and emotions about an issue, how helpful do you find your husband's suggestion? Choose one. Wow, 68% of the women said very helpful or helpful. 68% of the women said helpful or very helpful. Now they went from 95% of the women said that not even a reasonable suggestion was worth listening to. Once you let them work through their emotions and finally vent it and get it all out, now when you give a suggestion, 68% of them said that they found your suggestion helpful. So there's a process that needs to be gone through in dealing with the problem. 13% of the women said, not helpful or necessary. I usually think about what he suggests on my own. So sometimes just venting helps them to be able to bring closure or a resolution to the problem themselves. And 19%, almost 20% of the women said, not helpful at all. We think differently. He doesn't listen, or he thinks things through differently. Now, the only way that you can effectively listen, you guys, is not to get defensive or to take it personally. Wow, this is a man's call. This is a step up to the plate call for us guys. Don't get defensive. Don't take it personally. Be an effective listener. Bring closeness. Look at what it says in 1 Peter 3:7. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with your wives with understanding. Dwell with them in an understanding way. You might not always understand them, but you can dwell with them in an understanding way. Now I'm sharing with you this information. You can understand why your wife possibly is reacting the way she does. Men, you need to understand that when you provide those things that make her feel loved, make her feel close, she in turn will respond to that. Now I'm going to give you guys some warnings. This is a signal from the lighthouse. Warnings from the lighthouse to not hit the rocks and crash, to stop the crazy cycle dead in her feet. She starts reacting. She starts, venting. She's upset and she's trying to get these things out. At that time, don't do this, okay? Don't tell her, you're overreacting. Have you ever done that? You're just overreacting. This is not something you should be so upset about. You're just overreacting. Don't do that. Learn to listen. Don't question her about the facts. Interrupt her and say, no, that's not the way it was. This happened this way and that. Don't question her about the facts. Realize that she needs to release these things emotionally. Don't question her about the facts. And then also, guys, don't wonder about what time of the month it is. I mean, that's like very insulting. And then another thing, and I've done this, don't ask her to quit crying. Would you just quit crying? You know, we could talk about this if you would just try to be logical and quit being so emotional. Stop crying. That's not going to get you anywhere. That's not going to resolve the problem. You need to recognize these warning signs and don't do these things. Be patient, be loving, be understanding. And understand that when your wife has things triggered in her emotions and she starts venting these different things, that you need to be patient and allow her to get it out. And once she gets past that, you're going to be able to deal with these things in a much easier way. And I'll tell you, this is the biggest, hardest thing for us guys to do in stopping the crazy cycle in our relationships with our spouse. Also, this is not the time in the middle of her venting to offer her spiritual correction. She, remember, doesn't want an answer, even a reasonable answer to the problem. She wants you to listen to her feelings. She wants you to listen to her feelings. It says in Colossians 3:19, husbands, love your wives and be not bitter against them. If we don't learn what's going on, if we don't decode in our relationship with our spouse, we will hold on to resentment. That's a guy thing. We will hold on to bitterness. And the Bible says, don't be harshful, don't be resentful towards your wife. She is your bride. Understand her. Speak the language of love. And break down these walls of partition in your relationship with her. In Malachi 2:14 and 15, and this is probably one of the most powerful verses dealing with marriage and divorce, it says, yet say ye, wherefore? Because the Lord hath been witness between thee and the wife of thy youth, against whom thou hast dealt treacherously. Yet she is thy companion, and the wife of thy covenant. Therefore take heed to your spirit. See, guys, it's saying here, take heed to your spirit. Check out your attitudes. Look at the way you're responding. Take heed to your spirit. And let none deal treacherously against the wife of his youth. Malachi 2:14 and 15. You guys, learn to appreciate your wives. Give your wives affirmation. Here's some useful little tidbits that you can implement in your relationship with your wife. And these can be just wonderful things, little tips that can really help you to have a closer relationship with your wife. Give your wife face-to-face time. Remember I talked about how you guys like shoulder-to-shoulder time. You like your wife to be there and you can do things shoulder-to-shoulder. And I also talked about how your wife likes face-to-face time. Give your wife face-to-face time. Like this weekend for our wedding anniversary, my wife and I spent, the whole weekend together at a small little resort, and we spent some time together and just talked about things face to face. In the evenings, a lot of times, my wife and I set aside time when we first go to bed where we talk face to face about our day and different things. A wife needs that for establishing closeness. Appreciate your wife, and she will feel this affirmation from you. Secondly, don't be secretly mad at her. If there's something that needs to be talked about, talk to her about it. Get it out. And then allow her to express herself, and then try to get the thing resolved. Don't hold on to a grudge. Don't hold on to resentment towards your wife. It'll only further build up a bigger and bigger barrier to where there's cold wars going on and there's separation in the family. Third, try to empathize with her feelings. I know this is a hard thing for us guys to do, but empathize with her feelings. Fourthly, resolve and reconcile with her if there's been some kind of problem. It ties together perfectly with point 2, not to be secretly mad at her. Try to resolve things, reconcile with her. And fifthly, let her know that you are completely committed to her. This is so, so important to bring about oneness, to bring about closeness in your relationship. And lastly, treasure her above all else. Our next session is going to be a session with my wife and I where we're going to discuss kind of like a summary of some of the things that were presented in the seminar. You'll be greatly blessed by that as you get her perspective and my perspective talking about decoding communication in our marriage relationships.